This is the K-State Radio Network. Good to have you aboard once more for Agriculture Today. The corn planting season in Kansas. Well, typically it gets rolling the early part of April, or sometimes even as early as late March. But the current weather conditions that be may push that back a bit. We'll take a look at planting dates for corn, as well as adjustments that might be necessary to corn seeding in light of persistent dry weather, if in fact that turns out to be the case. Ignacio Ciampitti is alongside once again, crop production specialist with K-State Research and Extension. Of course, you're getting questions too, Ignacio, about where we're at with our field conditions and what one might do at the outset to give that stand a better chance. And let's start with planting dates. We're not to that crux of planting time yet, but we'll get there soon.
Yeah, thanks as always, Eric, for the invitation. We have some diversity when you look at our state and optimal planting time. What are the conditions that they will give you a very poor corn stand early season? And I will say dry conditions is probably a number one factor that will give us a very poor stand. Okay, and in corn, uniformity is a primary factor for yield. So when you're looking at early season stand counts, when you're looking about emergence of those plants, and then how the space they are, the plants. If we don't have a good timing on emergence, all plants coming very uniformly, and if we don't have a good spacing, or if we are missing plants, we have basically everything kind of to have a really poor yield or a lower yield as expected to the potential for that site. So dry conditions is one of the main factors. Hold it, and let's see if we can get a much better condition. Planting window for corn, still, we're not getting there. Many of the guys, even when I'm saying this, probably are already thinking in planting. Some are planting. I see some of the pictures of some guys already going with the planters and start trying that. If you are on a planter, things that you need to consider at this point is like the consequences of fluctuations of temperature, ambient temperature, and also then soil temperature could be, on the really downside. If you start looking at next week, I think that we are still okay. Looks like now close to the end of the week we'll start warming up, but then next week we'll start kind of still going down very slowly. And projections for the next coming weeks are still kind of in the same side. So I'm not too happy when someone is telling me that we'll be planting at this time of the year, because I like to get all my plants as soon as possible. I would like to see those corn plants coming 5-7 days immediately after planting. That is one of the best recipe for good yields on corn.
And if those soil temperatures are holding on the cool side, one will not see that quick emergence that you're talking about. So that's why you'd like to see producers hold off until we see these soil temperatures at least start to show some progress to the upside.
Yeah, and in corn, many times we would like to have temperatures around 55 and above. The challenge is not only to look at today's temperature, but also to start looking at what the 2-week forecast.
You want consistency there.
I want consistency on those 55s, and 55s going up. I don't want to see today planting with a 55, and then the next coming days I start seeing that the temperatures start dropping. One of the main challenges is that seeing that seed sitting in the soil for 20 days or 25 days is going into what we call perfect storm. If you have some insect or disease pressure, then don't blame any seed treatment, because most of the seed treatments will not hold a month just for you,
right?
Okay, just to make sure that you get your plant. So no complaints on seed treatment if you are really thinking that 25 days from planting to emergence. And then lack of uniformity, as I mentioned before. So when the soils are not holding moisture, sufficient moisture as today in many sections of the state, even if you look at the precipitation from the last 2 weeks, the fluctuation on temperature of those soils is really high. So
because of the dry conditions.
Exactly. One day could be on 50 degrees, the second day could be in 40s. One day could be in 40s, and then we'll go up to 55s. For a really good and uniform emergence, that is not the best case scenario. And again, the idea of thinking, this is one of the critical things that I always emphasize to corn farmers, making sure that when you are planting into moisture. Basically dusting or, placing the seed under really dry conditions is just a gamble. Even if we plant at 1 inch or 2 inch, we might have that seed probably sitting down there for multiple days. Opposite might be if we go to a wet scenario. If we go to wet conditions, I think that we have the same consequence. That seed is also not in the best environment. That seed will take longer to come up. So it's, again, another factor in the recipe for really poor stands. And planting day is in some way connected to all these. Mm-hmm. Primarily because temperature and moisture are the main factors, in some way affecting the uniformity and emergence in corn.
If it stays dry for an extended time, then one has to adjust their management accordingly, seeding depth, seeding rates, and the like.
Exactly, yeah. Let's go with the idea, if we stay dry, and if I'm getting too close to the end of my window for planting, okay? So if we play with those scenarios, with those conditions, I would say if we are going into a dry soil, our perspective for yield and yield goal will be lower than if we are going into a season that is very good. So adjusting seeding rate is one of the main factors there. And how we are thinking in adjusting seeding rates is like if you are going into 2 dry soils, dry conditions, we need to think in 2 points. One is we might probably have very well low emergence and germination in proportion. Many times we say, well, emergence and germination probably is around 85-90%. In some situations, even more, 95% of germination and emergence efficiency. So that means that in many times, if I want to get a final stand of plants of 22,000, many farmers are looking maybe in seeing 23,000. We need to be concerned if we're going to a very dry situation that we might get a lot of issues on the germination and emergence. So we might be as well pushing just a little bit farther just to make sure that we can compensate for that lack of a really good emergence and germination.
And a little bit, that's one's judgment call, isn't it?
Yeah, and a little bit sometimes, we are always thinking about 5-10%. We are not looking at really large changes. Why I'm saying this? What could be the issue if you go to the opposite side of increasing too much, on the seeding rates? And the consequences, you are basically planting and seeding many plants for an environment that you already know that you are starting with no moisture. That large stand, it will be basically trying to consume water, whatever is available there, and when the plant will reach more critical stages, if the conditions remain dry during the next month, it will basically face situations of a really poor flowering. You will finish with plants without ears, and in many situations you will finish with very poor yields. So if we are in a situation that we have a high water deficit today, it's not too wise to go to a high seeding rate and very high seeding rate. It's okay to be a little bit more on the conservative side and trying to account, for some potential problems early season of germination and emergence, but not just going into the opposite side of thinking I will double my seeding rate. We need to be very conservative on playing with the seeding rate in corn.
And seeding depth, you talk of planting to moisture, but if that moisture is significantly deeper than normal, well, that's a question.
That's a key factor. Anytime, and we did very nice demo plots a couple of years ago, it's critical to make sure that you place the seed, if you want to go into dry soils, with moisture. If that is 3 inch, make sure that you place the seed with moisture. Okay, leaving the seed there and gamble with the rain to see if you might get a rain in the next 7 days or 10 is not a good idea. We have in our demos, we did an exercise of planting 1 inch, 2 inch, and 3 inch corn. In those conditions, we didn't have enough moisture. At the 1 inch, I would say medium situation of moisture on the 2 inch, and then at 3 inches we have fairly good moisture conditions. And we place it with the thinking of, let's see what happens, and let's see how much this impacts in early season, size of plants and germination. So we had a situation that the ones at the 1 inch and 2 inch, they were coming, compared with the 3 inch, 7 to 10 or 14 days later, because we didn't have any rain after planting, and we didn't have any rain for at least 10 days. When we are looking and comparing 20 days or 25 days after planting, we start seeing already a difference in leaf development. So the ones that were placed on the 3-inch, they were having 1 or 2 leaf extra compared to the ones that were at 1 and 2 inches.
Once more, though, we hope that the conditions will turn very soon to help those soil temperatures warm up, replenish the soils with moisture. But the point, Ignacio, one needs a contingency plan to adjust if conditions don't go as one would desire.
Always, always. But I will emphasize to our farmers, realize that we still have a good planting window for corn. Make sure that you have set your corn for the best yield possible.
Good input, Ignacio. We'll have you back soon and talk more row crop production as we're earnestly getting into that season once again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Eric.
He's a crop production and cropping system specialist with K-State Research and Extension, Ignacio Ciampitti, and you're listening to Agriculture Today.
What is radon? Home exposure to radon gas is the leading cause of lung cancer death in the United States for non-smokers. In Kansas, 1 in 4 homes will test at or above the EPA action level. The Surgeon General recommends all homes be tested and fixed if necessary. Visit kansasradonprogram.org for more information. Test, fix, save a life. This message brought to you by the Kansas Radon Program, the Kansas Association of Broadcasters, and this station.
Welcome back. You are listening to Agriculture Today, and our guest is fresh back from an extended visit to Australia, where he learned about techniques and approaches to precision agriculture during his stay there. Terry Griffin joins us once more. As you know, he is a precision agricultural economist with K-State Research and Extension. Terry, what we want to do is tap your experiences and see what you picked up about the utilization of precision agriculture down under. But what got you into this trip to begin with?
Well, I was there 3 years ago at something called Soil Big Data. Someone at Sydney University with the United States Studies Center picked up on my Twitter feed and invited me to come to Canberra to speak on big data issues and farm data issues at the Soil Big Data Conference. And I had a hallway conversation with someone from Birchip Cropping Group, which is a nonprofit, sort of a applied research and extension group in Victoria, a state in Australia. And they asked me if I'd come to Australia if they found a reason sometime. And I said, sure. Well, 3 years later, the folks at Birchip Cropping Group found funding. And so I went, and the idea was I gave 7 invited lectures across Australia, different universities, and our extension and research cousins in Australia.
And you shared many of the things that you've talked with us before here on the broadcast as far as the research advances in this area. And likely those were well received, Terry.
They were. My first presentation was with GRDC. GRDC is their Grains Research Development Corporation, which is Australian government research development and extension. And I talked about small data. How do we use yield monitor data to make profitable farm management decisions? And we base this around on-farm experimentation. Same discussion you and I have had several times. I compared the Australian adoption of precision ag to the Kansas adoption of precision ag and got into some farm data issues. And that was sort of the crux of their trip is, how can we make use of farm data in a community? The very same discussions we've had here in Kansas.
In fact, there were quite a few parallels with respect to their data issues and, in fact, their farming practices in Victoria, right?
That's right. So Victoria is very dry. It's very similar to West Kansas. West Kansas receives, 19 to 22 inches of rainfall. This part of the world in Victoria receives about 16 to 18 inches of rainfall. So it's a little bit drier than West Kansas, but otherwise, a lot of similarities. Some of the bigger farms in Kansas are out west, for a reason. And the farms in Victoria were, for the most part, larger than typical farms that we think about. And those were the farms I was working with.
Tens of thousands of acres then.
Yeah. So the smallest farm I was on would probably have been 25,000 acres, and they went up from there.
And their cropping options are pretty much similar too. It's wheat country, at least
wheat
in part.
Country, wheat, barley. It was on farms that had canola. So, very similar.
So how advanced in the field of precision agriculture are these farms? Have they adopted technology widely, and are they deeply into it?
They are. So keep in mind the farms I went to, they took me to these farms because these were the most advanced farms in Victoria. So I saw large equipment. I saw 80-foot wide planters, seeders as they were called there. They had turn compensation, active downforce, recording down pressure, singulation with precision planting. So they had all the bells and whistles on these machines, and they can cover many acres a day.
You note that they, in Australia, in the area that you visited, Victoria, are encountering similar issues and challenges with data accumulation and management as we see here.
A lot of the very same issues. One of the barriers is wireless connectivity. So I got to Australia and I plugged in a Telstra SIM card into my phone, and there were areas in Victoria that I just could not get a signal. I was testing wireless connectivity with a speed test app, and it worked great in the cities and when I was on Wi-Fi, but in the rural areas where we're collecting precision ag data, we just didn't have enough signal to test. But some other similarities between our states. Let's look at Kansas versus Victoria. Very high adoption of automated guidance technologies, very high adoption of automated auto swath technologies, which was at first a little striking because those technologies favor smaller fields that's irregularly shaped. Not automated guidance; those favor large fields with long passes. But the auto shutoffs for the planters and the sprayers favor smaller creek along three sides and small fields. Yield monitors were nearly 100% of the farms I worked with. We evaluated 50 farms in Victoria. All but one had a GPS yield monitor. In Kansas, we're still looking at less than 50% are using GPS yield monitors.
So they're actually ahead of the game in that particular respect.
And they are. Keep in mind that the number of acres that these farms have too, they're rolling over combines more often than Kansas farms are, or they refer to them as headers. The whole thing's a header, according to the Australian terminology.
You said as well that there are tram line systems set up in some of these fields, and that was one of the unique features that you saw there.
Yeah, we've all seen the photographs, these beautiful fields that have these parallel sets of tracks where nothing's growing, and whether it's in Europe or Australia, and that's the common practice. And one, it's prevent compaction, and two, they try to make the tram lines as far apart as possible to reduce the amount of area that's not cropped. There's nothing growing in where the tire tracks are. So some of the farms I looked at in the Wimmera, if I said that correctly, were on 40-foot tram lines. So in the combine header was 40 feet wide. The planter was 80 feet wide, and the sprayer was 120 feet wide. So everything was set up. The tires were 3 meters, or roughly 9.5 to 10 feet apart. And so they had these tracks that were 10 feet apart every 40 feet. And they were very conscious about this because of compaction and some other issues. But the interesting thing about the tram lines, to me, was that it was common practice. And so I shot this short little video with one of the farmers who was explaining to me what was going on. And these are everyday common things to Australian farmers. For me, it was first time I've seen it, so it was new. And so I had him explain it to me and other Americans, and I posted this video on YouTube. So it's there. If you follow me on my Twitter account, Space Plowboy, you can kind of run through the feed there and find those videos and of Australians explaining what's going on.
So that would be an easy way to learn more about that concept, should it be of appeal here in the States.
Yeah.
So do the farmers in Victoria, Australia, contend with farm data management issues like we do here?
They do, and probably even more so. There's probably less pressure from agricultural industry for them to join compared to the United States. There's all these companies that are trying to vie for farmers' attention and for them to join with their farm data. But in Australia, there seems to be more organizations who are trying to promote these concepts. I mentioned GRDC earlier. There's another group, CSRO, which is actually government as well. It's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organization. Both have been supportive of nonprofit organizations providing funding to them to figure out the best path forward with farm data communities, and something I just haven't been seeing as much effort in the United States.
Was there a particular technological takeaway that, Terry, you thought might be something we would want to explore more aggressively here in the U.S., something you saw while in Australia?
One of the things I saw needs to be explored more is the local communities. For instance, the Birch Oak Cropping Group is a nonprofit research and extension group. These are boots on the ground. You can think of this as Kansas State Research and Extension, analogous to what we do. They wanted to create a community of farm data under their footprint, and then their neighboring group, they're not really competitors, but they have their own geographic footprint, would do another community. So there would be these series of small communities around Australia is the way that they're moving forward in. And in the United States, we've been looking at it more of a national type of effort. And that's something I think needs to be explored. Would local, smaller communities, maybe at state level, make some sense in moving forward? But the answer is I don't know what we should do, but we should explore that notion.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was a rich and rewarding trip, it sounds, in terms of gathering ideas and information and maybe inspiring a few things that could be implemented here in the U.S.
And I hope to make research collaboration partnerships, and hopefully in the next 3, 4, 5 years we'll have published research and some other new fact sheets coming out this year from this experience, maybe something co-authored between us and folks in the universities in Australia regarding farm data issues. We're on this, dealing with the same issues, and so I hope that something that becomes one of our outputs.
Good to have you back in the States. Terry, thanks for the quick summary of what you saw and heard about in Australia.
Thanks, Eric.
Terry Griffin is a precision agricultural economist at Kansas State University, and he recently spent 3 weeks in Australia, the state of Victoria. Very similar to Kansas in many respects, including how they handle and manage precision agricultural technology and data. You're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll be back after these few moments here on the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today concludes now with our weekly K-State horticulture segment, and it's our first offering for you homeowners on turfgrass management, as those lawns hopefully are greening up, cool season lawns that is. If not now, then very soon. We brought by once more Research and Extension turfgrass specialist at K-State, Jared Hoyle. One of the things that we want to key on this time, Jared, as we get into this spring, the drought that has hit Kansas and how that might affect one's turfgrass management. And it should be considered, you say?
Yes, it definitely should be considered. Some parts of Kansas have seen some precipitation, but the soil is very dry. The turf is wanting to try to come out of dormancy, specifically the cool season grasses. And so it's wanting some moisture. So it would definitely be a good time to go out as it's warming up and give it a good soaking. Not light and frequent, but a good soaking where you get the water down to the root system, and then you can kind of lay off of it for a little while, hope for some rain from Mother Nature, and then only from then on water as needed once you see it just starting to wilt. But that will be for a little bit now, but it would still be good to get some moisture into that soil so that plant's not waiting on rainfall, and it already has the moisture in the soil.
But it is important not to get into a routine of hefty waterings every week or so. That will cause more harm than good?
That is correct. Yeah, do not get into the hefty waterings on a regular schedule right now. You want to train your turf for the summertime because it will be hot and dry in the summer. And so if you give it water frequently through the springtime, then it won't establish the deep roots, and it will be looking for the water and for you to supply the water instead of suffering a little bit of stress and drought through the summertime. So it's like training it right before the summertime. So if you can soak it, get a good watering, and wait a little bit and only water as needed, and as it wilts, or once it greens up and you can see that it's kind of wilting a little bit and thinning, then water it then only as needed instead of a regular schedule.
And this is true as well for lawns that were planted last fall or overseeded?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is correct. If it was overseeded last fall, hopefully it survived the wintertime, but you'll notice as soon as it comes out, but only water is needed during the springtime.
Are different considerations needed here in regard to fertilization given the dry weather? Do we adjust the fertility program at all?
Fertility, considering the weather, I try to think of it as not overfeeding the turf. You don't want it to grow too fast in the springtime. It is okay if you did not do a fall fertilization to put a little bit on it in the spring. I would wait and do that later after it's greened up so it will use the fertilizer that you put on. Wouldn't put no more than a pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. And I really like a slow release at this time so you don't get a super flush of growth. It looks nice and it looks pretty, but what typically happens is the soil is still fairly cool, but the ambient air temperature is warm, so you get more shoot growth and root growth. And then when you get into the summertime, it'll struggle more because it didn't put those deep roots on it. So a slow release fertilizer when you're putting your pre out is okay if you didn't do a fall fertilization. If you did do a good fall fertilization, you probably don't need this springtime fertilization.
But you're a proponent of a combination of fertilizer and weed control then?
Yes, you can. There's a lot of products out there. That is an easy way to get a lower amount of fertilizer out instead of putting a large amount. That way you're putting your weed and feed, whether it be a broadleaf weed and feed or whether it's going to be your crabgrass preventer. But that's a good way to get a little bit of fertilizer out and get your weed control out as well.
Once more, though, be selective. A slow-release product is what you're looking for there. As far as the first mowing of the season, maybe that's going to come a little later given the slowness of grass emergence because of dry conditions, but treating that lawn right with the first mowing.
The recommended mowing height for fescue is right around 3 inches. I really like that height. If you mowed it last year at 3 inches, it's probably kind of batted down a little bit, and so it's not probably at 3 inches now through the wintertime. And so you can go out there and go down, I would say, to 2 inches. Some people go even lower. I like 2 inches because once you get lower than that, you start doing more scalping of the lawn, and you really don't want to scalp it. And that's going to remove some of that dead senescence, the brown senescence there. And so once that's removed from it, then your green growth will just shoot up just a little bit faster. But I wouldn't go no less than 2 inches.
Mm-hmm. And then as you get through the next weeks to follow, you want to gradually raise that mowing height.
That is right, as it starts growing. And it's going to be slower in the spring just because of the slow growth time of the year. But gradually raise it up each time and then until you get to that 3.5 inch mowing height.
You've one more step that you recommend here, Jared. Some folks will do this. Some folks have not taken it on, but it may be worthwhile at least every few years or so, and that is aerating the lawn where needed.
That's correct. We have a lot of clay and compacted soils, especially around a home, just due to traffic, construction, building. And if you do have those heavy clays, it's a good thing to go ahead and aerate. Whether you're pulling a core or just poking a hole in it, that's going to help the water get into the soil. It's going to relieve some of that compaction. And even though if you're not overseeding, it's still a good practice to do that because that healthy soil is going to have healthy roots and it'll get you through the tough summer times.
And aerate maybe before you fertilize or put down your weed control. Will that help the infiltration of those products?
Personally, I do like to aerify before I put down a fertilizer because it just creates a home for the fertilizer to go to. You don't have to wait for it to dissolve and then go into the soil. You've placed it at the roots where the fertilizer will be taken up.
So give that due consideration. The point of all of this is you're going to be setting the tone for the condition of that cool season grass for the remainder of the growing season by what you do right around now, correct?
That's right. So it's being a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. And it's a lot easier to get it growing and be healthy in the springtime when the temperatures are cooler than it is in the summer where we would be reacting at that point.
What we want to do is have you back in the not-too-distant future and talk about springtime weed control in specifics, and as far as things that might pop up, including dandelions and other broadleaf weeds. So if you'd be willing, we'll invite you back in then, Jared.
I would look forward to it.
And we appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Along with us for this week's K-State Horticulture segment, Jared Hoyle, turfgrass specialist with the university, and some things to think about there on early spring cool season lawn management with extra consideration to the dry soil conditions that we continue to endure here in Kansas. That is this week's horticulture segment for you. Our time is away for today. As we go, once again, if you'd like to listen to the podcast version of the broadcast using a podcast app on your mobile device, type the search keywords Agriculture Today Kansas and tap the subscribe button there. The program will automatically arrive on your device every weekday by doing so. Meantime, thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.